I'm calling the meeting to order.
Perfect.
So we need a roll call.
Roll call when you're ready. Faye, would you like to do that? Thank you.
Robin Wheatley,
Here.
Peggy Newberg,
Here.
Dave,
Here.
Bill.
Okay. Are you fishing?
Actually, fit here.
Exhibition.
Oh, it's fishing, okay.
Observer, superb.
Max.
Alright. So, Chair, you got your, as your next agenda item is a discussion of opportunities for transient lodging tax, remittance, business license, and permitting compliant rates. So this doesn't come along with any presentation material, I think it's just something that's asked for kind of a placeholder for discussion. And then staff will include.
I think one of the committee members asked to submit some bullet points on,
For
was that on?
the bullet points, that was for leading to the action plan that we're gonna work on rolling up during the next meeting. So I received 2 or 3 sets of initial comments from folks, thank you for those who sent them. But for those of you who haven't, it's not due until later. So, and when those are received, what I'm planning on doing is typing those and get redistributed to everyone, so you can also each other's comments to the next meeting on the 30th. And I will be able to include those in the agenda packet. Those are received prior to the 23rd. If they're received after that, then you'll get them here in part. That makes sense. So you will get them no matter what. We'll just have time for the 20th.
Okay, well, I think Dave has some ideas.
We're gonna discuss those this week.
Well,
We're gonna
you
talk about.
had that one art. About teal.
So I submitted those all to Clay and we're gonna talk.
Those were gonna be for on 30th, so that's for
Okay.
discussion on 30th. But the discussion we've got on the agenda for now is just a general discussion on requested. We're talking about compliance rates, TLT, business licenses, permit.
Well, okay, then I do have a comment.
Yeah, please.
I start, here would be my vision. And I say this, working for a software company, this is what I do almost every day. It's usually regarding taxes and payroll and stuff like that. My vision would be that anybody in town could apply on the city of Newberg website to operate a short-term rental. And everything they need would be on that site. They could upload any documents they needed. And as part of that, they would have to say which service that they were using, whether it be Airbnb, VRBO, or some other authorized broker. Because I don't even know if that's the right word. Agency, broker, operator.
I say we don't have a term for it officially, but you could call it whatever you want.
Yeah. And so in my research, and I shared this with you, Clay, what I found is that cities that have a policy, or in the case of the state of Wisconsin, it's a statewide policy, that the operators, brokers must collect the taxes and remit those to the governing body on whatever periodicity they require. They do that. So Airbnb, VRBO, will do that. And they have those stated policies on their website, how they administer that. So my thought on that would be, one, you could speed up the permitting process by having it online. You present a nice, consistent package to the people here in the city to review and approve. Hopefully get approval back quicker. But then by forcing or directing, VRBO or Airbnb to collect taxes submitted to the city, they're not relying on the operators to do it. And if you got a monthly or a quarterly remittance, with a list of all the rental nights that occurred, all it would take is one person a couple hours just to audit that a couple times a year. So you're not collecting checks from individual operators and then bill, every day. So I think it'd be a big time saver for the cities and health, as well as giving us greater.
like that.
So Dave, what about how would it work for that individuals who are running their own? Not to VRBO or
Just talk about
and
that.
how would we make sure that?
So you have to make it a policy that that's what they went through with.
Okay.
Okay. They can't sell, what do they call it, sell market,
They can,
self-manage. Self-manage, they can't self-manage. That's what they, because we literally were just talking,
Well, no, let's, can we use you that? She's got a. She's got a home, if you do it yourself, and you have a manager do it,
I mean,
but it's not VRBO or.
I trip.
It would be any
Yeah.
property management.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be Airbnb,
Right, okay,
Airbnb.
that's what I was thinking.
So,
And even on the.
I'm not familiar with iTrip, but Okta, Sweet Homes, iTrip, anybody that's willing to comply with the city policy. And submit the taxes to the city. I would say that they're fine, and then city retains a right to audit them. You know, periodically, at least once a year, to make sure that they're compliant.
So that would even work for short-term rental. You know, say something from resident.
Seems like there's no reason that our ordinance couldn't require both the owner and the operator to be perfectly well. To be responsible, that maybe go out to whichever. Doesn't have to be.
I think it would be easier if they had a limited number of authorized agents doing it, but if you wanted to open up to everybody, that's fine too.
That's part of the application process, right? If you're going to operate it.
the way that we talk about it as a rental management company, that's more of the person that's on response, if there's a complaint or a question or an issue. So that's not quite the same as the provider, or what I'm thinking of as a platform, whether that's Airbnb, VRBO, what have you. I don't think we have any discussion of that in our application materials currently. We do currently receive some remittances directly from some of those providers. But I would say that what we've seen, and you correct me if I'm wrong, James, on this, characterizing it, is we've mostly seen like an aggregated Excel sheet with things coming in finance. And so staff sees those, but I don't know how the annual intensive it is for them to. Together. I think some come in off those platforms, and to your point, some don't. And so I think that it is spot. And it seems labor intensive.
So my thought here would be two things: increase clients and revenue, but also make it easier for the city staff.
And I'm taking it a little bit further, fine them if they're out of compliance.
Oh, well,
Either financial, well,
that was the second part of my thing. So I suggested, and I don't know if we, my assistant here. I suggested a $5,000 fine. For first offense, second offense would be a $10,000 fine. So it seems like a lot, but if you look at, right, with how much taxes for $150?
yeah, but it's a business and you have to comply, so.
Right.
I was thinking of in the same vein, because then you're not gonna have vendors.
Right, well, and also I was thinking if taxes for $50 a night, that's probably cheap. 300 nights a year is $15,000 taxes. So $10,000 fine might even be too light. Be cheaper to pay the fine and not pay tax.
That's maybe fine, I see.
Right.
And if they don't comply, you'd have to choose a time frame, they lose their privilege of running it there. They lose,
Right, so
that would be strict as well.
I suggested, and again, this is just me making it, so. Second offense would be a $10,000 fine. And a harsh. Maybe third offense is permanent loss of license, but.
Well, as realtor, if I mess up, it can be fined a lot, and I can lose my license, you know, you have, every industry has that. Clients, motivating.
That's what it's just like community court for that. We're harsher on our peers.
Yeah.
Ask a process question. So, as I go, the TLP report kind of asked about how we know how often and how many they rent has.
Mhm.
And so are you also thinking about a way that kind of report, I guess, how do you know if somebody's just not paying? And it doesn't show up with the data report to that fund. Where's that?
Well, it goes, so in the cases, this has been done, we're not, hundreds of cities doing this, to require. The term that they use in Wisconsin is lodging marketplace. And so Wisconsin says lodging marketplace must collect sales and room taxes on behalf of the. So my thought would be, if we think that that. Look, we're dealing with just 3 or 4 lodging marketplaces instead of 100 individual people out there. It should be pretty easy to audit them once a year. We suspect that they're shortness of access. Now, I don't know how you would 100% verify that, every night taken was paid, but they have records of every night that's going to Airbnb. They think it's VRBO. So it should be pretty easy to run an audit report, just verify.
Using the booking platform that should tie into it.
Right.
With the payment portal. Kind of right now.
Compare the record of days with like 2
With
documents.
minutes, right?
Do you think?
It'd be hard to cheat.
Yeah, it is. Like for VR.
Yeah.
Do you think, people who are renters care that much that they have to sign up for it?
Because they're using it now.
It's a long.
Oh, yeah. Hey, you're not getting those on prices.
Yeah, we're all part of,
That's true,
I
that's
mean,
true.
we market our house everywhere we can. My thing is, which one is gonna pay the. I guess whoever you rent it through, so like if you go on vacation, you get VRBO
Oh.
and you book through VRBO. So even though your house is listed with Airbnb, iTrip, VRBO took the rentals there.
In that case.
Yeah,
And I've done that. I've rented a VRBO that I've seen on
yes,
another platform. And assume that whoever I rented through. is-
and so the tricky part is when you got someone who, like, I'm gonna find the owner and I'm gonna go direct to the owner because I'm gonna get a better rate. And then they bypass the platform that they're listed. So that is where,
So you list on multiple platforms, but when somebody rents, how do you let the other one know?
there's a central calendar.
Like, well,
Yeah, they go off. Mhm.
That would be a rare exception, what we just described.
I have people, my family that do that quite often.
Oh, no, personally, no, you haven't.
And I think it would be, yearly, because you want to set a precedent as a city. We're not gonna let it cheat being in our city. And so if the first 5, 10 years you did it yearly, then we might.
And is that audited every,
I don't think we need to
You're,
audit everything.
you're telling us, you're going to tell us that there's some companies out there doing this.
Right, so when we get to the next agenda item, we'll talk to you a little bit about, in general, some of the sorts of things that technology solutions currently offer around national interest governments. Which is different than those, like, the other side of the coin, which would be the private. So,
So how do we know, is there a cost? There's a cost, to doing that, right?
Yeah.
And so when does that cost doing that and the benefit of the tax? Do they equal, weigh, one heavier than the other, is it worth it?
Well, I think I can jump in.
Yeah,
I can see their data. I sell software to cities and counties. It's two parts. It's one, how much more revenue will you gain? And two, how much time will you save of city employees?
Or spend? You might spend more time.
Then you're buying the wrong software. It's taking more time.
Well,
The idea of the software should be that it should automate these manual tasks.
right, I was thinking in the audit. You know, going and auditing, that's good time. That's like a detective on the police.
could be, and that was why I was curious, because I didn't know what backgrounds are on what percentage of these, if we conduct annual audits, what percentage of that registry should be on? Yeah, everybody is 5% of them. And we do it on a quarterly basis, we do it once a year. We can expect, and that's just an expectation. It's not something you all have to know.
it would depend on how many platforms. City and.
Curious, is. Like, do you remember on the Guilty Form and and how if it breaks out rural by community by operator? Because I think I recall when we were getting located for, if this itemizes the operator. I can't recall if this just had Airbnb as the one that should say Airbnb Johnson, Airbnb Bill, Airbnb Sally.
And that's why I thought it seemed like it might be manual to some extent, because it didn't seem consistent, because we did see Airbnb and a few others platforms listed in the mix. But sometimes it didn't seem like it was a platform has one line, and this platform has one line, and that one does. And these others are all operators. It was kind of like there was a little bit of mixing.
Yeah, so the problem when they do some, is it Airbnb sends you $1,000 quarter one, do they itemize?
So,
Operator.
individuals.
In
have to-
their permits.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So I didn't get that granular. I think that's a question worth asking, but my assumption would be. And I want to back into that, you know, we have audits. Automated audit reports in our software that detail every transaction. So it seems to me that when Airbnb is submitting their permits, to use them as an example, it should list every property. The dates and the revenue collected each of those dates, assuming that the revenue varies based on the rental rate. I'm not familiar with the lobbying act, but I assume it's based on a percentage.
percent.
Right. And so it'd be pretty easy to, if you wanted to just drill down into. You know, specific property. You know, to look at. The nights it was. Rented, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking the audit would be on the non-conforming, meaning not, or non-complying. Addresses that don't pay, that are listed, but they don't pay.
Right, so you're thinking broad on that
Yeah,
collection enforcement side of things, so we're auditing for
Yeah.
those that have not gone through the process.
I would say we're gonna allow people to not. Work through an agency and require that all of them get audited every year.
So those are all people that are operating, they get on to check their occupancy, right, versus the
Sure, I mean, that would give them an incentive to use somebody who knows, who's proven it collecting the taxes.
Another thing we could do is when they assign the agreement, I don't know, business license. If they agree to commit to the city, and I understand. The penalty for not doing that.
And they do have that. So when they get a permit, whether it's conditional use permit or special, one, they do acknowledge those in the application materials.
My thought being, that if we made that stipulation, one example, we wouldn't have, and there's only what, 70 known.
But
known
70
city. So how many of those are not on the 10? 15?
we don't remember off the top of my head.
I mean, it's just, it's hypothetical.
Yeah,
But
it's really deep.
my point is that we're not talking about, somebody's not gonna have to do 1,000 times.
No,
We're talking maybe 1 or 2 a month. And that audit shouldn't take more than an hour if the person's.
That's why we're here, to staff, all the what they're getting.
Right.
right, and I think that. So anything that we do that's new is some amount of additional work, but it doesn't mean that it's an unsurmountable. Especially if it's.
I'm trying to think of ways to make it less.
Right, well, and there are some things, so just for example, again, we'll go into some of these in software solutions, but because there's a strong relationship between compliance and the workflow associated with permitting, so you want to make it easy, consistent, and reliable for people to get the permit. You make it hard and cumbersome and all the other things, they're less likely to be successful getting there or initiate it because it's too hard to find, too confusing to figure out, and not worth it. For whatever reason. So one of the things we'll be talking about is the permitting databases. So we have a permitting database now, but the city is planning on moving out to one future. We're hoping to do different things. So for example, right now we're on one that really doesn't do communication. And so as a result, we don't do annual check-ins. We don't tend to unless someone asks. And a case when it happens in the process, we don't tell someone when you're about to expire, you effectuated a permit or anything like that. We try and front load that as much as possible, but staff does not have time to go back and manually tell every person there should be a permit due that we expire. Because we just go to the system that is signaled. And that's not a big ask, but I think that kind of to your point, those things you should be able to do more with a better figured out online workflow for those folks as they go through the process or as they continue in it. It's not very exciting. I think I do. And if we had one that did some other, potentially some other things that are outside of the permitting process, that are more on the compliance monitoring or compliance enforcement, then what I'm hearing from people is people kind of like that.
I think I hear that David could write this.
You don't need like those.
It's not like,
Citizen.
There's applications out there to do.
There are.
already.
Yeah, because this is
And
exciting.
so most of this has been about, that we've talked about so far has been about the TLT releases and also the dollar values definitely highest. So that one's the, we remember, that one's the by occupant by night. Payment, so it's an ongoing form of compliance that's required for the releases, as opposed to the business licenses, which are an annual one that goes through each year. And as opposed to the permitting, which happens once and then runs. So it's each have different kinds.
Is that good or bad?
I'm just pointing out that's what we're talking about. So
Oh, okay.
talk about it as you want.
It's just,
And those makes the big difference on it.
Yeah.
And then they,
Right.
Yeah, that, and
so they can be
that's,
using.
yeah, that's, I think there's more to talk about.
And I'll go over one of the items too, so there were 74 operators who wrote the white paper. A total of 12 are gold star or UNEX, what we know of, and so that means they have a permit, a business license, and pay their TLC permits.
Wow.
Okay, well, there are,
So.
there are, 56 that do not have a business license. And I'm using the slide from, that's gonna go in the presentation.
Oh, okay.
There are 17 of those 74 that are not paying TLTs.
What?
There are 17 of the 74 that are not paying their TLT releases. There are 56 of the 74 that are not paying this, that do not have a business license. We talked about before how that one's particularly manual, we have strong interest, particularly some people that are sitting directly behind me, have a strong interest in finding a way to automate that, so staff and people. Yeah. And some of that's gonna be, I mentioned the automated communication, some of that's gonna be helping people stay in doing what they're supposed to. So it's not completely a need of people for that, it's some of it, we would like it to make it easy and more consistent for them to.
I hope nobody got the message that anybody thinks somebody's slacking or could do better. It's,
No.
I understand the time.
No, we never said that.
No, I just want to make sure. Here's.
Well, no, I meant the people that don't have their business license. So there's 56 out of 74, I want to use them. As well as the other staff, I mean, I have more vested in the staff. You work with it, it's actually two, but those, if there's 56 out of 74 that haven't done business license. You know, we could probably include communication to make them aware that it's due. That it's coming up, that it's easy, here's how you do it. That's,
And so I had thoughts on that.
okay,
Can we talk about that?
yeah,
I think business license, need to cost more. And I think they need to run longer, like you pay a higher fee and they go for 3 years. And I think there needs to be a very harsh, high financial punishment if it lasts. I once let my real estate license lapse, I didn't do it. It happened because the mail didn't deliver my payment to the state of Oregon. I had to pay $1,500 for operating as a realtor without a license. So. But I just think those things would help keep compliance with business licenses. I owned a business in Alaska and it was much stricter than anything I've ever done. Cause then you don't.
well, I was gonna ask if it's of interest to give. I'd like to hear what your experience was.
In Alaska.
Place.
Yeah, my. Back in the 80s, it was very expensive. It was expensive and you had to have it, you couldn't open a business without it. We're a little loose. I can't remember, I don't think there was any penalty because I didn't go out and comply with grade.
Remind us that
It's like $20.
for the license.
Yeah.
It was every year.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Remind me, are there all business licenses 50 or it's on license?
They do vary. I have
So two business licenses are $50, which the, for vacation rentals fall under a general business license. We have our home occupation.
we talked about, they could choose to have the primary dwelling on the property use vacation rentals. If not use, the accessory dwelling.
Yes. And but yet they could use it as a long term,
They could use it as long term.
so that's a little
I
contradiction
wonder why that.
in my, for a rural city.
Yes.
Yeah,
And I mentioned this in one of the earlier meetings, as our department works on housing affordability. Accessory dwelling units being available for residents for residential purposes. Doesn't mean that it's bad, and it doesn't mean that your committee should consider recommendations of making those. But to me, that is a point in favor of the standard we have now.
Yeah.
I don't even know if the standard we have now is done on purpose. Or if it's just a function of, that's how we define it when we created a definition in 2013. Accessory dwelling units in 2013 weren't even talking about quite as much as there. So I'm not sure that's on purpose. I think that's what's there. But
Maybe you will, maybe you will allow.
oh, they weren't allowed whatsoever. I was,
there was a process. I went through it. But I deleted dwelling unit.
Say it's not that one entire court. Well, we never tried to run it out. There's no problem.
I went with some clients.
we could probably just make this.
Say, no, shoot on it.
I think it was not. To be able to have a limit on it. Yeah.
I mean, we're not gonna talk about it here, but talk
Yeah, no, I think it's. I mean, it's something to consider.
the unit type. Well, and here's, just one of the things about prior meetings that isn't really like appliances. They are only allowed in single family homes right now, so they're not allowed in duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, multifamily buildings and apartments. They're not allowed in accessory buildings, so there's a number of types they're not allowed. But the majority of our housing stock is single families throughout the city. And one of the things, one of the earlier, it's actually in my paper too, that remember that distribution map of where you can do a permit processes they have to go through. The vast majority of acres that occur in the city are R1 and R2. They go through that type 3 procedure. Most R1 and R2. That's our low density immediates. What I was gonna offer up too, I had looked up and they're pulling up some more things because James was going to show, I think, some of the TLT fee that we do get from finance, so we showed us some reports. In the interim, I wanted to mention that the business licenses are, so we have code, municipal code related business licenses. That includes both purpose as well as some of the violations and penalties. So we do have some that is not the same as what we've talked about so far. So there's a place that that could go. If we felt that needed to be an answer, if it does feel like it's not really very compelling, it's not doing what we want. Just encouraging people to do it in investments.
Yeah.
And I was trying to see if there was anything particularly insightful in the purpose section. And it's not much, it's basically supposed to be the purpose of the business license fees is to cover cost administrating, registering and knowing which business purpose. But there is a purpose section which I find helpful in the municipal code. Almost every section is kind of part of justifying why you have one. So that that's there as well.
So this is what finance and non-desk work together in point paper. So how they kind of share it is that there's a top section which is for hotels and hotels. So that's less than 51 rooms, $500,000 per rent. X, Y, Z.
Wait, quick question. How many hotels are in town right
Hotels or
now? Hotel
hotels?
motels.
I don't know.
It's okay, don't stay.
We might go narrow it down.
I know, I think,
Fine.
okay. With one more being built.
But then it has the number of rooms, the beer shop, so, and I'm not sure, I don't know, you know, it's just how finance breaks it out, and so. I'm not sure if $3,000 for one bedroom. Is just a rent difference versus. $32,000, 5 bedroom. Is that 5 bedrooms rented 5 more times, kind of. This data doesn't really tell us, the breakdown of it is just. Rental value versus rental frequency. So
we don't know how it stays.
not just, I mean, I'm not sure,
I don't see it.
that's just my opinion, it's a spreadsheet, I don't have to.
That's not.
But
This is for 1 month.
it's a quarter. So. I mean, actually, I guess.
Oh, no,
Year, July 1st.
Yeah, so that was.
Does anyone think about, I think one of the cases, in the paper, had operators, and they bring their work. Part of the report, how many. People have rights.
Yeah, you don't get your license.
So, if I'm reading this correctly, the top grade market that fits their amount received at revenue like about the same year, 345, 346, 560.
That's just some people know.
Grand total. Maybe at the bottom of the sheet, we have the grand total.
Go to the bottom.
Oh, wait, I'll pay that.
So it does look like Airbnb is sort of breaking out the property.
Okay.
It's not.
I just came from a meeting at Newberg. And apparently the Allison has raised their rates 13%. And the others were thinking that means more TLT for Newberg.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Probably shouldn't quote me on, but that was the impression. That's why we're sitting on a quick conversation.
So and here was one of the things that I found kind of strange is that you had line and those, they don't tell me which address that's in.
We should address that.
It says price line and travel lodge. Some of these entries to me seem somewhat duplicative, so that as if they're coming in from price line, but elsewhere they're coming in from maybe the hotel itself or whoever they're responsible for. So it's like a platform single, kind of like Dave was talking about. In this case, those ones in particular were more of a traditional hotel
Yeah.
website.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't know if that's what we were seeing as well for vacation rentals, since we're seeing owner signal plus, be separate.
Well, I know in my situation, you wouldn't find anything. Because I.
Would-
You did say I was.
Would we have seen submittals on as a single operator? Multiple platforms on your property there, so Airbnb, VRBO, Casa, and some others.
Because I trust everything.
That's. Oh.
And so, I never see anything.
So I took this kind of your aggregator.
They were, they were the ones that marketed our house on all those maps.
Oh,
So they're like a property manager.
do you think that they would be handling the remittances or you could platform.
Well, they said they would make sure the city, they would pay, no, they said, who pays that? It will come out of your ownership.
The address is up there, didn't you?
We try to get rid of them just anonymized.
You not doing it?
Well, so
It's converted to public order.
people will,
Yeah.
yeah,
Is can the public see that?
well,
So, you know,
but they also just point out that there is, it looks like penalty of interest section. I'm not sure what penalty it is. It is in the frame,
There's nothing in.
So I've always been doing it.
Someone paid $79.92.
Oh, down there?
Yeah,
Where that comes from?
$79.
Yeah,
and I guess also, so I assume that houses that have line that flags don't have any printers in here.
Yeah, you see it. I think we're still, maybe by August, we no longer were. Permitted to do it.
Okay.
And we stopped doing it last year's. But we never did anything to tell the city we were doing it.
Right.
We just weren't going to do it because we were.
doesn't seem to be.
Right. But yet. That causes confusion within the city, so if you were forced to say we're not, you know, in the. Rules forum, you stop being a rental, you must give the city notice. But once again, enforce, it's a hard one to figure out.
Right.
If they stop for a year, that also just can use for. So. Like
It's not just stopping, it's effectuated. So it doesn't really matter. For the, my understanding is conditional use permits. I would have to look at what we have.
Doesn't that raise the question, go with the land or with the owner?
Right, and so I mean, if that's something that you're maybe got strong feelings about, that's why I'm going in now, if something else should happen. That would be good for the city council to kind of know.
Does it matter if we start approving these through the special use and not conditional use process? Does that affect whether it goes with the land?
It could. I would probably have to look how we typically drafted them in the past, because the conditional use permits do, the special use permits may. Let's see.
What kind of intelligent discussion can we have about pros and cons of it running with the land versus with the person?
Yeah. It's gotta be person.
The conditional use permit does run.
It does.
So the conditional
Oh,
use
separate from business. Like
Yeah.
separate from this.
Yeah, and so, you know, from real estate standpoint, that's a great thing to have with a house, or it's a bad thing to have with a house.
It's selfish.
It's a selling tool potentially, or it's a burden potentially. But you don't have to get the permit to do it. Just spit on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, permits just once, right? If you get a new order, they have to get another, well.
Since it runs on the land.
In a home that don't even know. So,
There could be things turn over.
And how long does it run? 2 years?
The permit runs in perpetuity, they don't have to do it.
Oh.
I'm looking to see if we have anything else on the special use permits and specific to those that go through the type 2 procedure instead of type 3.
So I could buy a property. Live it, it's my residence, still have to commit to it, and then later down the road, sign become applicable, is that true?
So that's something we've talked about in the past. So my understanding is that were the city to be proactively doing enforcement, there is a period that if you were inactive for X number of years, that we could consider the conditional use permit expired, but I've never heard of us trying to enforce that. Sure that it's actually good. most commonly for us to talk about is say the permit runs with land. And once you activate it, it means that.
Would it not be easier for the management system to say that when it's sold, you then have to activate it at that?
That would, so from a program management standpoint, it would probably be less confusing. Because you would have theoretically more proactive ownership, kind of those, and you have someone who knows your point person who has opted into the permit,
And
as opposed to one who runs with the land, maybe someone that's accidentally done it. But we don't have any limitations on the number of permits we issue in the city either, so it's not necessarily a problem.
but then the city know for sure that the person is who decided to make it active.
Right.
Whereas if I had bought my house and it had been there and even my real estate agent didn't emphasize it, just keep going, and then somebody tells me later that it was there, and I go, oh, I'm gonna activate it, but not even know all the expectations of doing it. So it seems like, because I could just say, well, and I would end up being one of those 50-some people that have no license because they're like, oh, well, it's here and I can do it. Seems like it's from a simple management and to the benefit of the city for all of the compliance issues to just make it go with the owner.
Too, because what if, that's, if you do the 500 foot rule, I mean, that if you're sitting at this, it's affecting other people in the area, so.
Yeah, if you're not nuisance, then we do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's.
It's definitely taking up
Yeah.
a spot that isn't being used.
Yeah.
Do you think it'd be easier on the?
As
As one with the,
I think sometimes it wouldn't matter and other times it would make it easier, and I don't see the need to make it harder.
okay,
Because if something runs 20 years from now, someone got a conditional use permit in 2020, it's 2040. And it's been sitting on as inactive, but someone wants to use it or meet additional criteria, could block other users, or we could have to try and dig that up to make sure that those people, if they had a vested right, that we recognize that. But it's gonna be kind of stale, it seems like, where it's really something that lasts for a long time. It's a strange thing to have an operation that be a vested right if it's really not going to be utilized.
and
So.
if there was a conditional use permit 20 years previous, who's gonna even think to go check? To see if there was one,
I don't know.
they probably end up doing it anyway, again,
Perhaps.
yeah.
Realtors would have to get an addendum that says, you know, have you investigated this?
Hmm.
It becomes buyer's responsibility. And maybe agency to say, there could be
To
rights to
check out.
this land. And then would it be? Is
All
it,
of
is
them.
it
Every
a single thing? Well, if it became, somebody gets sued over it, yes, then we'll always do it. That's how that works. So, yeah, it's interesting. Can you tell me why it currently runs with plan?
My understanding is that we recognize it's running point because it's conditional use. So the conditional use permit is the mechanism that's used to kind of have it say, we're gonna issue a permit, we want you to be able to put conditions on it that allow you to mitigate potential competitive uses in the area. And that's gonna also take it up to a public hearing. So in the last meeting, your group discussed possibility of moving it to type 2. That means all of these would be a special use permit. So we could specify, and probably one of those things that might talk to our city attorney clearly about exactly what is the implications of different permit types. And if we want to be clear that it runs with like, we can certainly specify that. I don't think that's, or if we wanted to clearly run with the operator or owner or some combination thereof, we would probably specify. That would be the applicant gets the right to do it. And that's something along those lines, but that'd probably be something we're gonna check with the city attorney, because we want to make sure that we're recognizing those vested rights correctly. But I don't think there's a problem specifying how it works.
In special use, you're not sure if it ends with the sale.
that's why I was looking at my phone, I was looking at the code section. And I didn't see anything specific about duration, expiration, those sorts of things, in that kind of quick glance, but conditional use permit is considered fairly.
So if we change it to a type 2 process, those become special use. And we don't have to worry about it, potential use, the ones that are already.
Well, and one of the things, if it doesn't have an expiration date, you could also always interpret things as it never expires because you didn't put an expiration date.
Yeah.
So I know in California, some jurisdictions deal with that with oil wells. So if you started drilling oil wells or gave someone rights in the 1920s and you didn't have certain environmental standards associated with things, but now you're doing drilling on a C permit, 2 years later, that thing's really valuable because it might have a lot more flexibility because it's got a lot of gray area.
That's deeded. That's deeded and the title company talks about that, and then the buyer knows. About it.
I don't, that one particular, I only know the land use side, so this is just for
But.
older.
What's the point of getting a land use? Huh?
To run it, well. To hook, you could say to hook guests would be one. The other one, some people are doing it as supplemental income for the residents they live at, other people are using it more as an investment. And it's strictly commercial use, which we recognize that that's a commercial use in code.
But the point of the land use permit. You make sure, parking, make sure that we get. For conditional. Make sure that it's not. Mismatched.
Under what would it take to have one not approved?
For example, right now, one of the same, so we have fairly clear objective criteria.
Forget about conditional use. Get rid of
I
it.
know, but regardless of the conditional use thing, we have the standards that we have. One of them is you have to have 2 parking spaces. You have to have 2 parking spaces that are single family home, that's also the standard. But if for some reason we found a home and they no longer have 2 parking spaces, and they have 1, we would say, you will make 2 parking spaces available, or you will not be able to activate this one.
Yeah.
Or we would just outright deny it because they.
Right, and for instance, one that got approved on Darby Court, one of the 2 spaces was inside the garage, single court garage.
That's a part, I mean, we count that as a parking space.
Right. But we go through the entire land use process. Is there any other reason? Just me.
Most of it is to ensure that they comply with the city standards, that's why we do it.
Okay, so if we go to type 2, we keep those conditions, we just roll them into criteria for type 2 use.
Potentially, yes, so the criteria that are the special use criteria, those would remain the same. We just wouldn't evaluate it against those, you remember there were 3 and A, B, and C initial use criteria that are fairly open-ended. We just don't kind of. What that would do theoretically is it would go to something like the planning commission. And if they evaluate this and say, no, it looks like there's a loophole where you could impinge on your neighbor's privacy, you can impinge on your neighbor's enjoyment of their property or something like that, then they could condition it so that those things are mitigated. So
But you've never done.
that, the only one I've heard talk about is like adding a vegetative buffer when a neighbor expressed concern because the operator's home. A couple of the bedrooms look directly into their bedrooms, and he said, it makes us really uncomfortable that you're not only gonna have yourself there, you're gonna have visitors.
That's so, because that was a criteria I had.
I also, I have limited experience. So. Ideas and projects that generally don't get violations. Like we fix things in the staff review, work with the applicant to where it wouldn't be approved. They've either made changes or they've drawn it, and so the planning commission hasn't heard things that they deny on the objective standards. Because staff has internally worked with the applicant, fix it or change that.
We do talk to people before they ever apply. And so if you have one that is a complete non-starter for some reason, you have 0 parking lot, I don't know how you would have no parking for your property, but you don't have it and you wouldn't have space to add it, then hopefully they figure out before they ever apply, so they waste their time and money. That's not, it takes us a lot more time to come up with and fully evaluate something to determine that it's not. If something meets all the criteria and you're right through. Okay, and then in between approval and denial is approval of the conditions. They're kind of like James is saying, we work with them, we talk to them, figure out what the problem really is, and then we might apply conditions that get them to approval. But they have to meet those, hopefully they will build the problem.
But I think kind of that question speaks to what I think the community I heard you guys talk about is like kind of changing that status. Staff is doing that work. Then the ones the planning commission here are the ones that are in an area, like you said, they're kind of are more of the subjective decisions that aren't easily fixable by staff.
And some of that, when we say the staff is fixing, the staff is working with the applicant, so they can fix it themselves, but often the applicant doesn't know that they had something that didn't fit. And so we make them fix it, or we tell them so they can fix it.
Because your credit space is clearly not.
There's always things be handled. Licensing procedure rather than a new procedure.
The way that we've got it, so. I guess let me ask a question back to you, what would be the difference in your mind?
Oh, but we saw that doesn't know that the owner of the property.
Yeah, I mean, this, if it's a special use permit or it's a license. To me, those would be very much the same thing, I'm not sure how it's necessary to do. It's just with the, when we have uses come through, you're required to get a development permit for use. So, this is what they get. Now. We could call it something different. So we could call it a vacation rental license. Create a code section, it's right next to the business license section. Have it go through that, and then say that vacation rentals are permitted rather than special permitted or conditionally permitted, which is what we say now. But we probably have to have a little asterisk in there that says vacation rental license required. So to me, you would largely just be moving it from one section of the municipal code.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be covering the title.
I don't think this, I mean, I'm not sure, I'm not a real estate professional, but I don't think this says on the title.
No. But it could, if it runs with the land, it should be on.
It doesn't live on a title, another.
Yeah.
Yes, the city, we look it up, hopefully we still got it at the property. We have, I mean, if you go look in our records room for the building permits, they've got paper copies and stuff.
Well, but they had a fire in the '70s and lost a lot.
That's, there's a lot of places that have floods, fires, and other force majeure and.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, since it does run with the land, it's not, it needs to be on the title. I don't even know how to do that.
So back to moving it to a type 2. It's not conditional use anymore. So we'll need to find out if it runs with the land.
It would, I can find out if it runs with the land, although since we don't apply an expiration date, I would say generally I would lean towards. And we could see if it lapses after a specific point of not being active.
Could we add a date? We change the code to include a date?
Or can make it,
Event?
could make, well. You can make it so that when issued, so this is where it's starting to look more like a license problem. By expiration date. But you could say that it is, the permit is good for 10 years, is good for 5 years, is good for some period of time, so you can do that.
But that still leaves the problem, somebody read residents. And it's running land. That it's not expired. If you want to allow X amount of things to be within a certain space, well, that takes up that space. And so if that resident is important for the city, and that opportunity, then if the new person buys it and not using it, then you've got a potential revenue source sitting empty.
Although at least we have an expiration date, whether it's 5 years later.
For that period of time, it's still, whereas if it goes with the sale of the individual, and they choose not to do it, and that opens up another space within that, to potential space within that.
Got me with the runway, James, the archery. As far as,
The sitting on the kind of invested, right?
once it's under special use, yeah, we can make that go away.
I mean, I know this is. A little bit off, okay, so the ADU, what's the parking requirement for an ADU? Is, do you require one space?
I don't believe there's partially because it's accessory to a single family dwelling, theoretically, they are.
So just thinking if we allow, if we decide to allow ADUs, does that change the compliance, the criteria of?
Yeah, because right now vacation rentals, no matter how many bedrooms are in there, so the occupancy standards associated with vacation rentals, it's. You can have 2 guests per bedroom. So you can't exceed that. But the parking standard is just 2 parking spaces, which is exactly the same as a single family home. So if you have a 5-bedroom house, you could have up to 10 guests, still only require about 2 parking spaces.
Yeah.
And that has come up, if you remember some of the public comments that we received, some of the pie charts, stuff like that, parking that, that's.
Are you just keeping track of all this conversation, so I'm not gonna leave it together into beautiful fabric?
No, I mean, I'm certainly, well, so what I'm hoping to do is that after these multiple conversations, that especially since we have on the agenda tonight, and then we'll have one on the next meeting, that where it says continue discussion of action plan, that's our opportunity to kind of roll up what we talked about. And hopefully capture some of those things, so that makes it a little easier on staff. And then when the next meeting, if you decide that is kind of your last meeting as a roll-up, which is what I remember you mentioning, you don't have to, but if you were to decide to do that to kind of create your recommendations, then at that point you can ask staff to proceed to city council, which comments when we present this.
That's what thought.
So nice and low. So that would, especially with ad hoc committees, at some point you're supposed to put a vote on it,
Yeah.
but you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it that rapidly. You can do it at your discretion.
So we could keep at this for 6 months.
Every 2 months, schedule would be challenging. That's.
So should we be talking?
Well, we still haven't talked about the software solutions.
Yeah.
Would we like to move to the next one? Because it's not like any of the talking points are off the table to get to the one after too, so. Yeah, let me take it, I'm gonna do a 5, say, everyone just take a break, say more than 5 minutes, less than 10. And we'll get started when everyone comes back.
Yeah, it's 18 after we.
18 or 5:25.
Where you're going to see.
No, I need to bring my daughter. She's gonna be born, I don't know, sometime between now and 20. This will be my knee.
Somewhere.
Yes, yeah. So we're very excited to.
You remember to. Thank you. All right, so. So Robin, you had a question.
Yeah, so, I'm trying to make sure I understand.
Sure.
Talk about special use.
Hmm.
So if I understand it. Okay, so what's is that another term for the type 3, you're moving for type 3 to type 2?
I see what you're getting at. So when I think generally about land uses and what you can do and where you can do it. We would typically have things that are prohibited, and usually there's a giant table with solid uses. And those are just empty boxes because it doesn't say you can, therefore you cannot. So those are prohibited. And then we have those that are flagged in this giant table of keys, stand for permitted use. And that just means that it's allowed outright use. Here people call that by right, we have here call other things. And you don't necessarily have to get a permit for this, you're just allowed to do this.
Oh.
So, and then you get then there's another coding, which is just an S, that is a special use. And so a special use requires a special use permit typically. And those then typically have an extra notation that tells you a little bit about what's specialized and what code section you have to go and refer to and how that procedurally is processed.
So that's not tied to a type 3 or 2.
It is not necessarily tied to a type 2 or 3, and then if you go to the section on related to vacation rentals, it tells you that it goes through this or that.
Yeah.
Or no, I actually, the table lists by zoning district, and zoning districts have an S.
That's.
We had it in,
Paperwork.
it's, so if in certain zones, so specifically in R3, C1, C2, C3. I think one I'm missing. Those are all labeled in our use table as an S, so they're a special use permit. But those that are in R1 and R2 are labeled with a C for conditional use permit. Conditional use permit for a type 3 procedure.
So special uses are what?
They're type 2. This in this case.
So-
Oh, I don't
So
think.
if we make it a type 2, it would be considered special.
I think in a way. It could be helpful to think about, type 2 is really. What. Vacation rental, it's like a big. So that's like the most number of zones by counts. That allow type 2. And a conditional use permit should be for the outlet. But from the map about zones, the 2 zones that are conditional uses are so big. That most of the vacation rental conditions. But the majority of types of zones are special in respect to, and they're not outliers. But it's the fact that our zones that are low density and medium density are so big. That it seems like the conditional is the base.
And I think what James is saying is too, is that those uses, it's not considered, so those type 2 procedures, we want people to be able to have public input, there's public noticing, but it's not considered something that is likely to have a high degree of incompatibility with the surrounding uses. That's why it's considered a baseline or generally acceptable. But then when things have a higher degree of potential to be incompatible with the neighboring uses, then you bump it up to something where there's a higher degree of, you're gonna go to a public hearing, the planning commissions to look at it. And that's kind of how we do this. To this point, we consider in our current codes, we consider R1 and R2 to be somewhat more sensitive. And so we want that enhancement of that ability to, that's the setting that we're at right now, basically.
So that's the vast majority.
And that, yeah, so it's,
There's some possible world where 90% of CUPs or behaviorals are type 2. Then you guys target what we want to be conditional use. Right, and so by choosing the policies that you guys recommend, fewer number are conditional. That are have a better effect than what we want to see.
and then Don also had a question.
Oh, I did.
I think it's about 2 things. We're saying,
I had a senior moment. Remind me.
so you had a question about a carrot and stick.
Oh, yes, how do we find out, with the ones that are not compliant? It is going to be difficult to get them there unless there's some sort of carrot or stick. In other words, it's to their benefit or their fear, meaning they want to do it for some benefit to them or their business, or they're afraid of getting the fine that was mentioned.
I would say that, so there's probably a variety of very creative carrots that the city could choose to do, but generally cities don't use a ton of carrots. The cities, tend to be like, we're just doing what we have to do, we got too much work to do. And they're government, they don't have to, we're the only game in town, we're the only ones that give out permits for this stuff, so frankly, we don't have to be creative, we don't have to now. So I would say that typically, best carrot that cities often offer is if they have good customer service. or if they make the processes. So those could be considered carrots, but frankly, you would hope that you always get those things and that they're not particular carrots. That's what is good customer service.
That happening.
I
But another carrot can be, is if signed up between this point and that. Point, no questions asked, you just get in, nothing from the past. After a certain point, that you're not compliant, big stick of the pine post. I mean, it's just other lens of.
That would be, yeah, I'm trying to think about exactly how to characterize that, but I mean, so for example, one of the things that there's an amortization period, so that is the grandfathering. So if we say we want an amortization period, and if you do not comply, but you have an operation right now as of X date, and you get right with the city, then we'll allow it to continue even if it's not conforming. But now you'll be permanently in the system, and that I think gets to a little bit of some of the Lincoln City model planning commission recommendations, which is, we haven't talked about this for weeks and weeks. But the planning commission has a recommendation that's 5 points, and the 5th point, they said they liked some, I don't remember exactly what it was, they liked something about the amortization and the licensing associated with Lincoln City. You remember better than that?
That is an interesting question, though, to say that those that have not been in compliance may not be in, those that have been operating without a license may not be in compliance. And if we allow them to continue, once they've been, then you could have people going.
Well, because you have a couple of different categories. So if you're operating, you don't have a permit now, but you started operating before 2013, well, you're doing nothing wrong. Because you were grandfathered in, you were not required to do this. Now, they should still be paying TLT taxes. They should still be getting business licenses. But they weren't required to get a permit. I'm not pointing obviously in particular, but those, so there could be good actors in there. And that's actually one of the things that to me, from staff perspective, I think makes it kind of confusing about, well, it's going to be hard for me to tell someone, if someone claims that, oh yeah, we've been here forever doing this. So we were definitely in operation before 2013, so we don't have to get a permit.
But we definitely need to sunset that.
Yeah. And you can blame them as tickets.
Well, I mean,
At some point,
from an administrative feasibility standpoint, so being able to administer something properly, staff can support that because it certainly makes it clearer and everyone plays by the same stuff. But I don't see a problem with necessarily having a relatively, I don't know what a reasonable amount of time for everyone to get compliant is. But I would want to make sure people who do that they have time to get the information a reasonable amount of time. It doesn't have to be excessive.
You do that in months, it doesn't. Especially if we change it to type 2,
Okay, so
it's easy.
Yeah.
I know for a year, but I would also have to stick in thinking that any rent between now and then, you also have.
It's subject to TLT, of course.
and I think in those,
Exactly.
and that might be part of verifying that they are actually operating already in there, like saying, well, you've been paying TLT on a permit, so you're one of these people talking about. Maybe we're not talking about people that don't pay TLT, don't have a business license, don't have a permit. I don't know if those are the people that I'm interested in amortizing because to me they don't count. If they haven't done anything to document things, it's documentation that would show me. Maybe there's a situation. I just don't know. But would you all like us to jump into this? Sure. Okay. So we're going to talk about software solutions, and keep in mind this is not a deep dive into every product on the market because I don't know what those are. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of the general types of products. We'll go through a few examples. So on the next slide, we've got just a reminder on the sorts of things we have going on, the trends. So this in the white paper, by the way, this trend is landscape, so it looks a lot less extreme. It looks very extreme right now because we stretched out. But basically, you do see the upward trend right now. So that's January through August. We've got 12. So right now we have about 16 that are in process or approved in 2023. So that is higher and is more than last year. We still got about a month. See how it is. And then if you look at that once, it shows some stuff on our Venn diagram. Oh, look at that, all that fun stuff just popped up. So that's that one, if you remember, 74 operators. And we've got about 18 with business licenses. Got about, or sorry, so there's different things going on here, right? So there's a total of 57 of 74 that are paying their TLTs. There's a total of 42 out of the 74 that have permits. There's a total of 18 out of 74 that have business licenses. So that 74 comes from those 3 data streams, so they overlap in different ways, but we only have 12 in full compliance. Which is not ideal. We've actually already started changing the way that
I have wanted to talk.
that's excellent. One of the things staff's already started doing is talking more proactively to finance and changing the way that we send people labs, so that's what we call the welcome packets, and I don't know if that's really nice, but that's after you get a permit, you get a welcome packet that tells you how to register ATLT and how to sign up for a business license. So that's probably the least, people probably don't appreciate a welcome packet, but that's what we send them, so congratulations, and start paying taxes. And
And so at least some people know I have to go get this.
some people know, but I have a feeling that our communication has been somewhat inconsistent. So staff turnover hasn't helped with that, the being kind of straddling a couple of different agencies hasn't helped with that. And so we're already working on some of the communications to try and make that better. So this report has already helped with recognizing that there's an issue. So I think that's good. So on the next slide, I stole this as a basic, some of the things we're trying to solve. So in addition to knowing what the trends are, is asking ourselves, are there problems that they can solve or not? And so this one's from OpenGov, one of the platforms that we mentioned as an example in some of those. And so they had a nice little kind of effective short-term rental regulation from their side of things, how they're looking at it. And so what they kind of view when they discuss it, some of the issues are not dissimilar than some of those. And I'm thinking specifically about the public comments that we see when people express concerns about things. So things like housing availability, neighborhood preservation. When I say neighborhood preservation, I'm thinking of everyone that uses the term livability, neighborhood fabric, or when I say social cohesion, the closeness with neighbors. Protecting quality of life, which I would say is also probably related to neighborhood preservation. Economic development, so that additional income for just a regular homeowner, or also supporting the tourism industry in Newberg. We want to balance so people can appreciate living here, but we recognize that tourism is good. It's nice when people come in and drop off their money and go home. So, and then safety. So making sure everyone stays safe and these sorts of things. One of the things we haven't talked about a whole lot is some of the solutions that I thought was interesting here is physical safety and habitability inspections. So we don't do a site inspection to make sure it's appropriate for visitors to come to it. So we have found in some recent ones when people have a mismatch on the number of bedrooms that's on the assessor data versus what they put in their application, we're finding that some of those things maybe not permitted as bedrooms, and they need to, we want to make sure that people are really staying safe, properly ventilated, proper fire emergency access, all those sort of things, that they really are staying in the right places. So that's something to think about too. And then the regulatory practices over here on the right are some of the ones that they just generally describe. To me, some of those issues are relatively similar to what we've been talking about. They might not be the exact same, but they're not the same. So, and then on the next slide, basically just paper talks a little bit about technology solutions, but not a whole lot. The way it was structured was existing conditions. So how many permits, how many we have, what procedures folks have to go through, those sorts of things when they were adopted. It talks a little bit about the public comments we received and the sorts of feedback that we've gotten. It also talks a little bit about where we have some code that's not necessarily municipal code, like our housing production strategy, those sorts of things. And then last in the white paper, to recall, it's got all the case studies that go in there and they're sliced up in a couple of different ways that we think about. And so specifically, this one's in the case studies section, and it's related to compliance, which talks about that a little bit. But it's really just a snippet. And then something that's important to remember was that when we talk about technology, we're talking about ones specific to government. They are not necessarily the same ones that the private sector would see for people who want to do posting or who want to do market research about whether or not they should be doing like this because it would be beneficial. So there are different products out there, not everyone's. Government's only need some, that's what we're talking about. So if a technology solution is that we don't have currently is chosen, I would generally expect it to be selected off of one direction from the city. So depending on what the city council wants us to do, what the objectives are, we can pick a different technology solution perhaps that we don't have. Or consider if there's just an enhancement to some of the things we already have, whatever the city uses. And then thinking about the specific objectives that we're trying to fix. So what are we trying to do? And so in general, the things that I would expect us to look at are, do we need additional data monitoring and gathering? Do we need to improve or automate some permit registration, permit reviews? Do we need to increase our compliance rates for registration, permitting, for tax remittance? Some of those have some overlap. Automated communication, so just generally having that better customer service focus, but also if we can automate it so that the city staff don't have to manually check in with you once a year, once a quarter, whatever it is, that's a plus. And then creating data and support for staff, we do have to do enforcement. So something where, whether it's audit data, so for those operators, if their occupancy and their rooms is matched, that would be potentially a good thing, like you guys mentioned. Also, if we have a registry that's fairly up to date, active, and easy to use, code compliance gets a call, and I can just send them the list out of there and say, these are our folks. If that's one of your vacation rental folks, then they're on our list, whatever that means. And on the next slide, talk a little bit about the platforms that we have. So some of these, I do not expect most people to know these. Dave, you happen to know these because you work with industry that's in or adjacent to some of these, then great. So Central Square is the one we use for our permitting database right now. So that's used by primarily the engineering department, building department, and planning. So for business licenses.
Yes.
So we heard the sigh there, that could do some feedback on what you're talking about. It is, so we're looking at an alternative solution. And so we're currently still vetting those. We narrowed it down to a couple of platforms that seem promising, but we have to make it work for, actually, so I said that it was building, permitting, and engineering to use it, also finance uses it. So like right now, they do all of our daily reconciliations, we take money, finance kind of left with what is currently a fairly laborious effort, so that we're also including them in that process. Granicus, we use them for public meetings and agendas, but they have what appears to be a relatively robust short-term rental management program solution. Tyler Technology, we use them for a number of items. I mentioned here budgeting, employee reporting, utility billing, public payment portal. So there's a couple of different modules that we use. And then OpenGov, I think we only use them for one thing now, and I think that's for budget forecasting.
Yes.
Oh, there. Oh, thank you. I forgot about that. So are they part of Cartograph or Cartograph part of OpenGov?
Cartograph is approved.
Oh, got it. Okay, thank you. They just pointed out Cartograph down here, which we use for managing facilities and infrastructure. They're part of OpenGov. That's one of the other modules there. So, and then NeoGov we use for human resources and training modules and those sorts of things. And then Esri is the general GIS. Esri is a pretty common tool that you plug into lots of different ones, but that's not one we would necessarily think of a module for us, but we would expect it to be integrated into all of it. So the next, is another question?
I was just thinking, so if we decided to do every 500 feet or 600, that would be useful.
That would be a tool that we would need to have available. And so, and we could currently do that in some way. We would just want to make sure we create the workflow so it's not too hard for staff to do it. We don't have to like lean on just one person who knows how to do it, but we can just kind of hit go for a property and get a buffer. Okay. Hopefully a buffer that also has our existing registry so we can see it's too close. So, on the next slide, we have, so I wanted to start off with data monitoring and gathering. So to me, it's helpful to know a little bit about what you can do, where you can find it. So if we don't think we need these all do different things. So one of these examples that I wanted to give you is inside Airbnb. So inside Airbnb goes city by city, and they'll basically do a bunch of data collection where they create an API that kind of links out to or scrapes data from several platforms simultaneously. And so this graphic up here is from Salem, obviously not too far away, and also not gigantic. But it's not like they're just looking at New York City.
We're not just looking at Santa Monica. They're not looking at just big cities that everybody goes to. They're looking at the whole world doesn't go to Salem, and yet they still have this. So I think that's actually, to me, was kind of promising. But it shows you down to a point, some data on those that rent out the entire home or apartment. The minimum stay, price number, activity, average night. Here. Over here, those that are at 0. So it's actually and it shows exactly where they are, and it color codes them based on. On the next slide, we'll go into, oh, thank you. Is it like a? But, work. Just the processes on what we currently do. So type 3 and type 2. Type 3 is just longer, but basically we go through intake. We make sure they gave us all the materials that they're supposed to give us. It gets circulated to a number of different agencies to make sure there's no conflict. Vacation rentals tend to be very low conflict. So the agencies don't really typically have a whole lot of comments. We conduct public noticing. If that is for a type 2 procedure, that is just sending out about a written comment period that's available. If it is for planning commission hearings, we send out that public noticing and advise them they can send us written comments or attend a public hearing. Then if it is a type 2 procedure, it goes through administrative review, i.e. the decision is made administratively by staff based on the criteria, or it goes to a public hearing where the planning commission evaluates it against the criteria and makes the decision. Following the public hearing or the administrative decision, you get a public notice sent to the applicant and anyone who established standing. So that's anyone who made a public. And then there's a right to appeal, either by the applicant or by people who established standing. So what the technology solutions to think about is, could they make that easier by doing something in the workflow, which generally makes it more of a one-stop shop for folks where it improves communication, or if it's some piece of those, so as we talked about, that includes the permitting process, as well as the business license process, as well as DOT processes, could we automate that or help set up so the communication is improved without staff having to be. So that's where I see opportunities too for registration and renewal automation. So those sorts of things, whether we're talking about the business license or whether we're talking about primary permitting, or perhaps other opportunities that are in the DOT. So there are probably solutions in all 3 of those streets. And just to highlight the ones that are examples, some of these solutions may include enforcement mechanisms, others may not. So we did a demo with Net Assets, and we asked about, is this your sort of enforcement? And they said, not really. Said, we're here to help you register people in, not to penalize them for not doing access. That's just not the design they use. And it was the approach they use. But others, that's part of their strategy. They want to help you get everyone in, and they'll do that by finding bad actors that are not bad actors, people who have not followed the rules yet, but who really want to. So some OpenGov, Granicus, Casella, Net Assets, all ones that I was pretty familiar with that exist in that system. So on the next slide, compliance and enforcement. You guys, some folks, I think we mentioned here too, that New York City recently upped their compliance and enforcement associated with things. So you're basically New York City was one of the places where it probably took off very early. And so they've probably had a lot of people that were grandfathered in, just, we have some, but very, lots and lots of them. And they recently ratcheted up the enforcement of what people were required to do, and so all sorts of things have started happening as a result of that. And, they were in a very different environment, it's a huge city, but if they can make a big change to how they do things and choose to start more proactively enforcing the rules, we would probably do that. But there are some different things that can be done to do that, and so we can do that, like we talked about, for any of those streets that are associated with vacation rentals at this time. And one of the things that it can do on the customer service side is it creates better consistency. So potentially, the compliance is not just about catching people who aren't following the rules, but hopefully it makes it a little easier for them to follow the rules by reminding them of things in class, by letting them kind of get back into compliance, at least without it being a big hassle. And with that, and keeping it on their mind, this exists and we're expecting to keep up with it. So if you tell someone that they're expired or lapsed on something that you've communicated with them for 3 years, they're probably going to feel relatively blindsided, and it's probably not really good customer service on that side. And that applies to lots of things. And then some examples, Granicus, it used to be called Post Compliance, that their module was purchased, but that was one of the ones that on the West Coast was relatively popular. They're based in San Francisco. We saw a lot of people using it in California, the agency I used to work for, and they seemed fairly early and proactive in helping agencies figure out how to do permitting for this stuff. And then OpenGov was another one that does those sorts of actions. So next slide. I think that's it. That's my last slide. So that was a pretty quick one. It was just intended as an overview on this, but we can always go back to any, if something on there is helpful to look at. But did folks have questions?
Comment and question.
Yeah.
First thing, I think, are we gonna look at changing any city regulations? How we permit fees and how we collect taxes and things like that, because if we're looking at doing the software, we should either make those changes before any software is adopted, so then software can be configured to effective changes.
Okay, this group will make recommendations to the city council. And then we will decide if we want to do it or not. And if we do, then we will give all that to the staff and they will put together all the proper information. And bring it back to city council approval.
And then figure out what's up, assuming we.
That's right, but having this committee and the council understand that those needs might be there and that not everything needs a policy solution, something might be more appropriate for a technology solution or enhancement would be great. And so I think whatever comments that your group wants to make, and we'll get to staff, but it has to go through city council first. And that's why I wanted to start with that earlier slide, that our expectation is that if we do pursue one of these, that first it gets to city council. And to get to city council, this committee to give them input so they can help in the decision.
Well, I think it's a great idea. How much do you think any how much software costs?
Not right now, because I haven't started looking into it. If we get a feeling from city council who want us to get into this, but check with them, especially if there's budgetary implication greater than X, or that exceeds the existing budgets, we have to come back to them anyway. But the other part is we probably have to figure out some of the financing too, because I don't know. Yeah, I guess I don't know exactly where the funding would come from for it, or if the models, some of them are based on.
Well, I think in theory,
Yeah.
it would be based on increased TLT taxes.
Yeah, that's right.
Would fund it.
So there's a presumption that those come in from the operation, which.
That's
what they do right
That
now.
would probably pay for hard costs. Soft costs is you probably save 40 hours a month of city worker time that can be used elsewhere. That doesn't save the city any money, but it gives resources that you can use for city workers to apply some.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's free up availability, which practically is not the same as saving money, but it's not too far off because you're.
Use the same value. That's a quarter of an FTE.
That's right, exactly.
Staff have it.
Then
So SDC money is only for infrastructure?
Yeah,
Mhm.
This is not infrastructure to,
no, but the, I mean, the transient lot, if,
it's fully paid for.
if we get all these people to comply, the transient lodging tax.
Yeah, if I understand the spreadsheet, you got 350,000 a year in transit lodging tax. And you know that half or more of the short-term renters operators aren't paying any taxes. So, and that is, I couldn't tell a breakdown from the hotel motels to short term. But let's say we could get from 50,000 a year to 100,000 a year in TLT tax. And this software costs 25 grand a year to run. I think that's a win.
Most likely the companies that are gonna offer this to the city, are gonna base it on the amount of taxes that would be paying over.
But probably the amount of taxes or a number of total dollars or number of operators. But I'm just going off what we would charge for the city of Newberg wouldn't be that much. And I'm just thinking 20, 30 grand years increase would be.
Especially if you're pulling in a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it stays for itself.
Yeah, and that's what, but right now, so that's one of the things that we have to figure out if it would be authorized for such an enhancement to be paid for out of TLT funds. Right now, those go to primarily to Taste Newberg, with a split one to visit funding visitor center operations at the chamber. And so we finance would have to figure some way to make the money go to where it needs to.
Well, the city gets 65% of the TLT.
Well, and I don't know exactly what funds those go into, and that's just
Yeah.
part of me not being
Yeah.
familiar with the city's budgeting process.
I just get how much,
30.
and if we, according to Armstrong, we change the policy, then we get a bigger.
Flip, it would flip. Yeah, we started this prior to the state law about it. So we got a deal with, we take 65, Taste Newberg gets 35.
So it's gonna come out,
Our law is the opposite, we would get 35.
it's gonna come out of our 65%. However, at 65% on the shipping. There's another way. I'm sure.
For sure.
It's the analysis, the white paper is correct, and I think it would be more than you.
Yeah,
Taste Newberg would be happy to.
Yeah, they,
35%.
Yeah,
They could
maybe
be-
one less three.
They're benefiting.
Well,
They should contribute to them.
Yeah.
Right?
on Taste Newberg, when I spoke with Lee Jensen, the executive director, and she had indicated that her biggest thing is not necessarily it's just to make sure everyone's playing by the same rules. So her biggest grievance was not with vacation results, she thought that was fine. She does want to make sure that that residents continue to enjoy having tourists in town, so she doesn't want them to be nuisance. But she also wants, one of her biggest things that she has seen as far as she just wants to make sure that those people who have gone through the effort and the expenditure follow the rules. That everyone else has to follow those rules too, because it's just that there's a kind of unfair or fairness issue at stake that she thinks the hotels pay in. That certain proportion of people who have gone through those hurdles have made an effort of doing that.
I just have one comment, mainly to you, if, as we're discussing, ideas with changes to the policy and procedure, and we're doing all, it's like maybe it doesn't need policy change, just procedure, that's gonna make this thing go more smoothly. I would like to hear your thoughts, doesn't mean that we'll do it, but you're so much more familiar with all different facets of this.
Oh, well, I
Be
mean,
efficient.
I think both of us, all of us appreciate. Your committee does not have to include staff excessively, it's your conversation, but you've made it very roundtable and available for us to participate in it. And we're happy to, but we also don't want to dominate the conversation or do any of that stuff. And really think that dialogue here has been, I've been very impressed by it, because it's been very open, and I think that over the few meetings we've had, I've heard people listen to each other and made that I'm quite fun. So
Can you review what you want us to send you? Those are us who didn't send you. anything.
So before so ideally, before the third, in my perfect world, before the 23rd, send me your comments on comments that will help you and your peers get to the city council. That can be specific suggestions on what you think everyone should be doing. Or what you think should be included in the recommendation. It might include things that you're just flat not on board with. If you think it's worth saying explicitly. So I think one of the things that came up in the last meeting was, I think Don had said, just so we're on the same page, no one's talking about prohibiting these outright. And everyone kind of concurred, no, that's not what we're talking. And I actually thought that was good for setting basis, because you're kind of pulling goalposts in, so people get on the same page. And that one's pretty extreme, but you know, it was obvious enough that it's different. If there are things in certain areas you aren't sure about, you think need greater definition, but you think that it's worth exploring, you don't have to figure that out completely here with each other. You can say, for example, you would like staff and or city council or city council to consider X. So we have talked about having on the agenda for next time the discussion of looking at enhanced criteria for special use for vacation rentals.
Yeah.
So I think that's good. So if you don't get to a resolution on exactly what you want to be there, you can say that, you know, we still have feelings that this needs to be explored. That would be fine, because maybe the city council, or maybe the city council says staff. They said it needs to be explored, we agree with them, go slow and come back. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to fully bake everything. The sorts of things that.
Kind of double that. The more information you give the council, the easier it is for us. But we're 7 people, and everybody's gonna have opinions and can change.
And
Family or public comment.
And you could decide to roll up your comments as statements. You could designate someone to kind of speak on your behalf. You could do what planning commission did, and kind of roll it up in a single. You did it in Logan, I think it's maybe Logan unless you want to, which I think actually most of it bad, capture it clearly, that everyone's on board. But they kind of did their 5-point recommendation. And what I had asked them to do was have a good discussion, but then roll it up so I can transmit it to the city council and make it easy for them to understand what you mean. Because if you give them something that's unclear or ambiguous, they're not gonna do whatever.
We never saw that.
It's gonna be presented on the 20th. That's what we're expecting. I am pretty sure that the short-term rental update is going on the 20th, but I haven't actually seen it.
I saw.
Okay. So we'll be asking for direction at that time, but if city council wants to wait for this committee's input, we'll come back on to continue discussion.
Why are we talking about on the 20th if we haven't met yet? About our recommendations.
From the staff side, we've been trying to get the recommendation, the informational item, just the white paper and the general update to the city council as soon as possible.
Good.
And then you have it. And what, the white paper? This group's seen it, because they've seen what was presented to the planning commission.
Okay.
There will be a very slight difference in the one that goes to city council. We'll say, instead of saying draft white paper, we'll say white. And that is pretty much the only thing I changed, except for, I think, some of the dates and source citations that were at the bottom of the draft. What timeframe? I think that's it.
So that's good, and the council have that background, information, time, recommendations. Yeah.
Do you want us? Maybe I might submit suggestions of just.
I want the committee's group to figure out how you want to do it. And so that's kind of what I meant, is that how you choose to roll up your comments at a committee is up to you. You can memorialize them into something like a either whether it's a motion, writing something down together, You can, I mean, as staff, we can put a Word document up on the screen. Draft up something to make sure you're all okay with it. But I mean, that's kind of that motion making process and recommendations. I think that you'll start the next meeting with everyone's comments on what they think each of you needs to know to create that.
Simple, yeah, 5 people's input, and then as we go over it, and, yeah.
So with that, can we confirm the next meeting?
The next meeting is scheduled for November 30th. And it's at 4 o'clock, unless you guys tell me.
Sorry.
And so in those 2 hours, we are. Yeah, I didn't see this on it.
I only let start on this.
In 2 hours, we're gonna put together the final recommendations to the city council.
You're gonna try to.
2 hours, 3 hours.
You're gonna submit your list.
Yeah.
If, from the staff side of things, if it doesn't get all wrapped up in that session. There's no, I as staff do not have a time frame that says that must be your last one. That's just kind of how we talked about it most so far.
Could well need one,
Yeah, that'd be fine. Leave them alone.
should be able to make some good progress.
Okay, and so when we submit this, do we submit it just to you, not to them?
Yes, that's what
You would typically submit it just like that, and then we'll include it in the agenda packet. And anything that comes in after the 23rd that can't be in the packet, then I'll also bring those copies for everybody. Out here, and I will send it to anyone who's not attending.
Yeah.
Separately after.
Yeah.
Cause I wanna make sure.
Because
These,
Landy,
well, these are being recorded, so you'll be able to.
Yeah.
listen in later.
I've been to lots of meetings on somebody's phone,
Oh, that makes sense. People on Saturdays.
but that's okay.
You'll be so busy looking at pictures of that baby.
Not coming here.
I know, but
I'll be working on this on the way to Texas.
We got
I don't think I have anything more. It seemed like we flowed right from the presentation into something shape that felt a lot like discussion action, which was our agenda. Wow. So,
Think we're done. I gotta go.
okay. All right, next meeting, November 30th. And if the chair will adjourn us. All right. Thank you.
But you say you want some,
I walk it.
you want to ride? Once again.
I have to, no, because I have to get some stuff together. I have to go pack up.
If it's 5 minutes, I don't mind.
I'll take a look.
Yeah.
I'll look at it.